Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be reading a book by E.B. Wheeler, Mysteries of the American World. I've read a book by her before, Mysteries of the Modern World, and I figured I could share with you another one of her books, Mysteries of the American World. I did brew up some coffee. It is the morning. So I'm going to drink a little coffee as I read here. But right now you can see you got, I'm guessing, what you need to know to get like the geography of these stories. So Crater Lake, San Francisco, Kanab, Salt Lake City, Crow Territory, Dallas, the Bermuda Triangle. That should be one that's in here. Charleston. They have Roanoke, which makes sense. This is Ocracoke, Green Prairie, Long Island, Bridgewater, Salem, Bennington, Catskill Mountains. So let's see what we got here. Chapter 1, Montezuma's Gold. I think this is the Aztec leader, maybe the Mayan, but we'll find out. Kanab is a small town nestled in the desert of southern Utah, surrounded by red rock cliffs and canyons. It experienced a brief boom in the early 1900s as a backdrop for Hollywood westerns. Most of its history has been quiet, a remote outpost on the edge of a larger events and places. Yet Kanab may hide a secret worth millions of dollars. Some say this treasure hides in a maze of caves filled with twists, turns, and deadly drops. Others claim it's in a cavern that can only be reached by swimming deep in a lake. For believers, Kanab is the home of the lost treasure of Montezuma. Montezuma is known as the last ruler of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs, or Mexicans, ruled over a vast, wealthy empire which is today central Mexico from their city of Tenochtitlan, one of the largest and richest cities in the world by the 1500s. Though some of the people they conquered grew loyal to them, others hated the Aztecs. And this looks like Tenochtitlan right here. Giant, I guess it's a giant city. I don't know what the population was. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez came to Mexico in search of conquest and gold. It didn't take him long to learn of Montezuma and the Aztecs. Cortez found allies among the enemies of the Aztecs and marched to Tenochtitlan. He took Montezuma captive, forced the Aztecs to bring him treasures that he melted down into gold bars, and eventually slaughtered many of the people. The people of Tenochtitlan revolted against Cortez, and Montezuma was killed, either by the Spaniards or by some of his people who felt he had betrayed him. It looks like he got a drawing showing Montezuma meeting with Cortez and La Malichi, the enslaved Naha girl who helped the Spanish in their conquests. I vaguely remember that. In his letter to the Spanish king, Cortez wrote, "I determined to quit the city that night. I took all the gold and jewels belonging to your majesty that could be removed." One of Cortez's men, Bernard Diaz de Castillo, gave more details about that night. He said the greater part of the treasure consisted of broad bars of gold, with which the horses of men were as heavily laden as possible. When the horses and slaves could carry no more, Cortez allowed his soldiers to take as much as they were also. So the Aztecs could not get it back. But the Aztecs had destroyed the bridges that allowed passage over the lake and canals that surrounded Tenochtitlan. Diaz wrote, and before we had time to look about us, we were attacked by vast bodies of the enemy, and the whole lake was instantly covered with canoes, so that we weren't able to move on any further. The Spaniards had to cross the water to reach safety. Swimming in armor and carrying gold is not for the faint of heart, especially when under attack by enemy forces. Cortez abandoned his men and charged ahead. It was every man for himself. Many Spaniards dropped their gold in the race to escape. Diaz reported that he only took a few small gold objects, which may be why he survived. Many of those who clung to their treasures died for it. They learned too late that they couldn't take it with you. Wow. Cortez later returned to Tenochtitlan to conquer it, but by the time he did, the gold was gone. The Aztecs, it seemed, had collected all that remained of Montezuma's treasure and hid it away somewhere. Besides the Spaniards and Mexican accounts of the treasure, we have physical proof of the story of the lost wealth. A gold bar discovered in 1981 by workers under the streets of Mexico City, which was built over Tenochtitlan, matched the description and chemical analysis of the gold bars Cortez created by melting down Mexican treasures. The bar was found on the route the Spanish took to escape. That was only one gold bar, though, probably dropped by the fleeing Spanish. Where's the rest of the treasure, and why do people think it ended up in Kanab, Utah? That's a good question. The Aztecs were not native to the area of Tenochtitlan. They had come to central Mexico seeking a new home from somewhere further south, a place called Aztlan, either northern Mexico or the southwestern United States. Their language, Nahuatl, is related to the languages of the Hopi of Arizona, the Utes of Utah and Colorado, and the Shoshone of Idaho, and the Comanche of New Mexico and Texas. The Aztec migration took place around 300 AD. This is about the same time the Australian Pueblo people suddenly abandoned their cliffs, dwelling in the American Southwest. Both groups were probably affected by the same problems of drought, increasing fighting over resources, and other unknown pressures that historians are trying to understand. And those are your Pueblo cliffs there, which is pretty cool. It isn't just language and regional troubles that connected the history of Mexico and the American Southwest before the arrival of Europeans. The native nations had developed complex trade networks. Copper bells from Mexico were traded in the southwestern pueblos. Parrot feathers from Mexico had been found in the ancient settlements of the American Southwest, and the Hopi people have a clan named for parrots, despite the fact that parrots are not found in Arizona. Evidence of some beliefs, like that of a serpent god, are found from Mexico through the southwest and even to the people around the Mississippi River region, where the people also built pyramids. These things suggest that Aztec or Mexican influence reached far outside central Mexico. Many people believe that Aztecs tried to return their treasure to Aztlan to protect them from the Spanish. This leaves many possible hiding places for the treasure, though, since we only know that Aztlan was somewhere north of Tenochtitlan. And these, I guess, are parts of the treasure. So, earrings, it looks like. Some treasure hunters claim that in the early 1900s, a prospector named Freddie Crystal was looking through the records of an old monastery in Mexico for clues where to find the treasure. He found ancient documents from the time of Cortez. He had prospected in various parts of the southwestern United States, and as he studied one of the maps, it reminded him of the area around Kanab. This, he thought, was a map to Aztlan. Crystal hurried back to Kanab and began his hunt for a cavern that matched the description on the map. It took him several years, but eventually he found a cave that contained petroglyphs and steps carved into the stone. The area around Kanab had been on the outskirts of the Australian Pueblo culture. Ancestral. Wow, it's too early in the morning, guys. Ancestral Puebloan culture. So many old cliff dwellings and ruins remained in the area, but he believed these remnants were Aztec. He apparently convinced some of the townsfolk as well. Kanab was a small, struggling settlement at the time. It didn't even have electricity, and people were excited for the chance to get rich. Local legends claim that one part of the caves had been blocked off. The treasure hunters broke through, and found a network of caverns, including what seemed to be booby traps to deter intruders. After several years of hunting, no one found any treasure, only a few old mule bones. Most people lost interest in the hunt and had crops and livestock that needed to be tended. Freddie Crystal disappeared from town, though some locals say he was found with his throat cut and his treasure map stolen. Wow. It's difficult to say how much of Freddie Crystal's story is true. Kanab didn't have a newspaper at the time to report his activities, and he doesn't show up in any official records, including the U.S. Census in 1920. That doesn't mean he didn't exist, since official records sometimes miss people, especially if they moved around a lot or didn't want to be found. There were far fewer records of everyday activities 100 years ago, when there was no internet or cell phones, and even radios and cameras were rare. The stories of Freddie Crystal and his cave have been handed down as oral tradition, stories that can change a little with each telling, especially over many years. Between 1915 and 1922, an archaeologist named Neil Judd excavated some of the canyons and cave near Kanab and found many ancestral Puebloan artifacts. Then in 1920, Jesse L. Nussbaum discovered mummies in the area that were much older, from about 200 AD. Nothing they found ties directly to the Aztecs, but it does show that the area had been inhabited for a very long time. Freddie Crystal could have been working in the area at the same time as these archaeologists, maybe even drawn to the region by their finds if the story of the Mexican map is exaggerated. Or perhaps this story evolved from the expeditions as one or part of these archaeologists. Treasure hunters have not given up on the idea that southern Utah is Aztlan. Recent interests have shifted to Three Lakes, a deep pond just outside Kanab near where archaeologist Neil Judd found some of his ancient artifacts. Some gold seekers think petroglyphs in the nearby rocks mean treasure is hidden there. The Child family bought the property around Three Lakes in 1980s and began exploring the 35-foot deep pond. They found a tunnel leading off from the bottom of the pond and speculated that this could be a water trap hiding the treasure. In a water trap, the water that flows into a pond or lake is dammed, and a tunnel is dug that goes up to a cavern above the water level. The treasure is hidden in the cavern, then the pond is filled, and the only way to get to the treasure would be to swim to the bottom of the lake and up the tunnel. For extra security, local legends say that the Aztecs who buried the treasure killed each other at the site to keep it a secret so that their spirits can guard it forever. The legend doesn't explain how anyone would know if all the people present were killed. True. The divers the Childs brought in to explore the pond couldn't make it through the tunnel to see what, if anything, lies in the end. Some divers say it felt like their air was being cut off when they tried to swim up the tunnel. And one said they saw shadowy figures deep under the water. They refused to explore any further. Wow. I guess there's a tunnel. Wow. The Child family then hired someone to drill where they believed the treasure chamber would be. In the initial drilling, they found what appeared to be flakes of gold on the drill bit. Before the driller could come back with a larger drill, though, he had a heart attack and died. The family next decided to drain the whole lake, but that plan didn't get very far. They first met resistance from Kanab residents who worried about I'm worried about how damming and draining the lake would affect the town's water supply. Then the Fish and Wildlife Service stopped the draining because they discovered that the pond is one of the only places in the world where the endangered Kanab amber snail lives. Some people saw a resemblance between the snails and the Aztec gold jewelry modeled to look like the snail shells. They wondered if the snails were another guardian sent by the Aztecs. It isn't hard to see why the Charles started to wonder if the treasure was cursed. They decided that Aztec spirits still guarded the treasure, and they weren't meant to retrieve it. They sold the land to Best Friends Animal Sanctuary. That's kind of cool about the snails, amber snails. Maybe this was that area. If there's any treasure in the lake, it's now protected not only by Aztec goats and endangered snails, but also by the dogs and other animals that make Best Friends Animal Sanctuary their home. You can visit the animal sanctuary and even see a small pueblo in ruin on the property, but treasure hunting is not allowed. Maybe the gold is down there in the tunnel. Maybe it's still lost in Freddy Crystal's cave. Maybe Kanab was a false lead and the Aztland is somewhere else, waiting for the right time or the right person to find it. After all, the gold that the Aztecs hid from Cortez was never been rediscovered. Where would you search for it? If you go treasure hunting, don't dig on private land without permission. Bring lots of water and watch out for curses. I love this. This is what you do. And if you find something historical, bring some archaeologists to document it so we can all learn from your amazing discovery. Wow. I like the end. It's just like, if you go treasure hunting, don't get cursed. Alright, let's see what the next one is. That was cool. I know Hernando Cortez was looking for their stuff. Now, I didn't know he had found it. I thought he never had gold, but I guess that's because I missed the fact that the Aztecs hid their gold. Now, if you know anything about American history, you probably know the Lost Colony. This is going to be Roanoke. The first tried to be permanent settlement in America before Jamestown of 1607. But let's see what we get here. Now, I've done a lot about Roanoke, taught lessons about it, teaching, so I'm interested to see what they say. All of the people vanished, every man, woman, and child. John White had been gone from the English colony of Roanoke, Virginia since 1587, 3 long years. He had left behind a settlement of about 115 people, including his daughter Eleanor Dare and his newborn granddaughter Virginia, the first English person born in America. They intended to start the first permanent English settlement in the Americas. They hoped to gain more wealth and freedom and counter the growing Spanish influence in Florida. John White had originally come to Virginia with an earlier expedition that failed because of conflicts with the Native Americans. Yet he was so convinced that the English settlement could succeed in Virginia that he talked his family and over 100 others into moving there in 1587. Now they were all gone. This is the natives here. Socoton people of North Carolina. John White not only left the settlement to direct much-needed supplies from England. The colonists had intended to land in Chesapeake Bay, but their ship's crew refused to go further than Roanoke Island because of bad weather. Ships bringing supplies to the colony wouldn't know where to look for them because of the change in plans, so it reluctantly returned to London in 1887 to give directions to the supply ships. When he arrived in London, however, he learned that the Spanish Armada was launching an attack on England. Queen Elizabeth I commanded all English ships to defend the country. When White finally found a small ship that could be excused from the defense in 1888, he set off for Virginia. French pirates attacked along the way, stealing all of the supplies and wounding White in the buttocks. Did not know that. A defeated and humiliated White returned to England. Only in 1590 had the English gained enough advantage over the Spanish for White to arrange another ship or trip to the colony of Virginia. The trip across the ocean took almost 5 months. On August 15th, they came within sight of Roanoke. White reported, "We saw a great smoke rising in the isle near the place where I left our colony in the year 1587, which smoke put us in good hope that some of the colony were there expecting my return out of England." The next day they prepared to go to Roanoke, but saw the smoke from another fire on a near island, Croatoan. They hurried to reach that fire, thinking they might find some of the colonists. Instead, they encountered a grueling hike, no fresh water, and White said, "No man nor sign that any had been there lately. If the fires weren't man-made, they may have been the result of severe drought and lightning. The seas around those barrier islands are rough, and several sailors drowned the next day trying to reach Roanoke." Wow. The group pressed on, finally landing on the beach. They saw the footprints of 2 or 3 peoples in the sand. White assumed them to be from native people, probably because the prints weren't made by English boots. His party hurried on and found a tree with the letters CRO carved near the top. White had arranged a signal with the colonists. If they were able to move to the mainland, they were supposed to carve their destination on the trees and the posts of their houses, so they could know where to find them. They were also supposed to carve a cross if they were in danger. White considered the letters CRO for a time, then he continued on to the settlement. "We found the houses taken down and the place very strongly enclosed with high palisade of great trees. And one of the chief trees or posts at the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off, and 5 feet from the ground a fair capital letters were graven, Croatoan, without any cross or sign of distress." Croatoan was an odd place for the settlers to relocate. It was another island, even further from the mainland and more exposed to storms coming in from the sea. But White had no say in knowing what had happened in the 3 years he'd been gone. After all, the settlers had built a fort against some threat, perhaps the Spanish or one of the native tribes. Inside the palisade, they discovered the colonists' heavy iron objects tossed aside and overgrown with grass and weeds, indicating they had been gone for some time and had not had the time, strength, or interest to take the heavier items with them. The sailors also found a collection of storage trunks buried by the settlers that had since been dug up and destroyed. Wright recorded, "Of the same chests, 3 were my own, and about the place many of my things were spoiled and broken, and my books torn from the covers. The flames of some of my pictures, frames of some of my pictures and maps, rotten and spoiled with rain, and my armor almost eaten through with rust." There was no sign of the small ship White had left with the colonists. White was distressed, but his only hope lay in the carved word Croatoan. They hadn't seen anyone on the other island when they investigated the fire, but that must be where the answers waited. Unfortunately, another terrible storm hit that night before they could go to the Croatoan island. They lost all but one of their anchors, as well as some of their fresh water. Almost out of food and water they needed to resupply, but the fierce Atlantic winds blew them in the wrong direction. They could not make their way back to Croatoan. With their ship battered and their supplies gone, they returned to England. White was never able to arrange another trip to the Americas. He died hoping that his daughter and granddaughter were alive somewhere in Virginia. That still blows my mind. That is tough. But the settlers were never found on Croatoan or anywhere else. Spain and England were competing to control North America. Spanish records reveal that the Spanish sent an expedition to the Chesapeake Bay region in 1588 to drive out any English settlers. They saw no sign of the Roanoke colony and any other English people except an abandoned fort from the earlier expedition. Sir Walter Raleigh, the explorer who had sponsored White settlement, sailed back to Virginia a couple of times in 1590, but he was more interested in searching for the mythical golden city of El Dorado, or the more practical commodity of fragrant sassafras trees than in finding the settlers. I promise, guys, I can read. It's just really early. An English exploration party went to Chesapeake Bay in 1603 to search for the lost colonists, but their captain was killed by the native inhabitants, and the rest fled. In 1607, 20 years after John White left the settlers of Roanoke, the English finally succeeded in establishing a Virginia colony at Jamestown and Chesapeake Bay. The Jamestown settlers heard several rumors from the native people about the fate of the Roanoke colonists. Some local natives told them that villages where the people lived and dressed like the English, and where the English people were held as prisoners. That is something that happened throughout the whole frontier, and the natives would capture settlers and take them in kind of as like a to give them more people if their people got killed by these wars. Others said that the English settlers had all been killed. Jamestown did send out some search parties, but the settlement had enough of its own troubles with starvation and fighting neighbors that they couldn't spend a lot of time looking for their lost countrymen. The English never determined what had happened to the lost colony. What are the possibilities? Tree ring evidence shows that the Chesapeake Bay area suffered severe drought in the years White was gone. The barrier islands, including Roanoke, are also subject to disastrous storms and hurricanes blowing in from the Atlantic Ocean. Some researchers believe that the colonists were starving and desperate and decided to return to England in the missing boat. Then they either died at sea or ended up on some other island as an evermore lost colony. Other historians suggest that the Roanoke colony came under attack by native peoples or by the Spanish. After all, the settlers had built a large defensive palisade. After White left, the Spanish claimed to have never found the colony there, and they likely would have bragged about destroying an English settlement after the embarrassment of losing their armada to the English. But the English had a story of conflicts with the native inhabitants. The native peoples understood that English explorers or settlers brought devastating diseases to their villages, and they distrusted the newcomers. Worst, when John White and the colonists had first arrived in 1587, they tried to seek revenge on the Roanoke tribe who had killed previous English explorers. They ended up attacking the wrong tribe, killing members of the friendly Croatoan instead. After that bad start, it's certainly possible that there was more conflict with the Native Americans' neighbors. Some native people later claimed to have killed English settlers, though they couldn't have said this was to frighten the English colonists at Jamestown. Many have blamed the Croatoan for the destruction of the Roanoke settlement, since Croatoan, another spelling of the name, was engraved on the post. But John White didn't find any bodies, bones, or graves, and the settlers didn't leave a cross to signal they were in danger. The settlement White found had been dismantled but not destroyed, except for the plundered trunks the settlers had tried to hide. It looked like the colonists had expected to return for the rest of their possessions but never made it back. Why go to Croatoan instead of the mainland, though? Maybe a hurricane destroyed their boat, or they encountered fighting with the native people on the mainland and they went to Croatoan to seek help or to negotiate peace. Maybe the group split, with some going to the mainland and some staying to meet White when he returned. One of the people with the settlers may have been Monteo, a Croatoan who converted to Christianity and sometimes served as a translator. He might have influenced their choice to go to Croatoan. There is possible evidence that some of the colonists were on Croatoan either as guests or as prisoners. Shifting sea tides had changed the islands. The Croatoan is now part of the Hatteras Island. In the 1700s, a European adventurer visited Hatteras. The native people there had gray eyes, a color commonly found in England but rare in native peoples, and said they had white ancestors. Iron artifacts, and especially chips of iron from forging found on the island in 2025 suggested Europeans lived and worked there during the 1500s and early 1600s. But the Roanoke colonists are not the only Europeans who came to the area. Early English explorers, as well as the French and the Spanish, visited the area and could have mingled with the Croatoan people. Other archaeological evidence may prove the settlers didn't move to Croatoan, or at least didn't stay there for long. Researchers studying John White's map of the Chesapeake Bay found small markings on the map that might show the intended location of the new settlement the colonists planned to build. These markings were covered by a little patch of paper, maybe so that if the Spanish found the map, they wouldn't realize where the English were. In 2020, archaeological digs 50 miles inland from Roanoke along the Chowan River on the mainland where John White said the settlers planned to move, found pieces of European pottery and other objects that suggested several small groups of Europeans may have lived in the area. Unfortunately, it's difficult to prove that the artifacts belonged to the colonists and not different Europeans. And if they did not move inland, why did they break into small groups instead of sticking together? The mysterious Dare stones provided one possible explanation. In the late 1930s, a band claimed to find a strange stone on the Chowan River in North Carolina while hunting for nuts in the woods. The front of the stone read, "Ananas Dare, plus Virginia, went hence in heaven 1591, an Englishman shown John White's Governor Virginia." Ananas Dare was the husband of Eleanor, John White's daughter. The reverse of the stone claims the settlers moved inland but suffered from disease, attacked from the native peoples until only 24 settlers remained. Finally, a European ship sailed past, and the natives, perhaps fearing an English invasion, killed all but 7 of the settlers, including Ananas and little Virginia Dare. The inscription claimed that the settlers were buried in the nearby hill with a stone bearing all of their names. Not long after Chowan River stone discovery, a stonecutter in Georgia came forward with a series of stones he claimed to have found detailing Eleanor Dare's many exploits in America, including surviving in a cave and marrying a native chieftain. The stonecutter was revealed to be a fraudster who had often sold fake Native American artifacts. He created the hoax stones to make money. Most historians then dismissed all the Dare stones as forgeries. I've never heard of the Dare stones. And I'm guessing now why it's not taken seriously. But the stonecutter had no connection to the first stone, the Chowan River stone. It continues to be a source of contention among historians. Its inscriptions appear to be very old with deep weathered cuts that would be difficult to fake, especially with 1930s technology. Some historians think the lettering and the language are correct for the 1500s and are probably real. Others say it sounds silly and made up. The only way to settle the truth would be to find the hill along the Chowan River and with the 16th century burials and a stone naming the murdered settlers. New types of DNA research have recently solved other cases of missing people, and some scientists hope that it might do the same for the lost colony. If DNA from living Hatteras Native Americans or other North Carolina tribes could be matched to DNA from the lost colonists, it would prove that the colonists joined the Croatoan people. But we have no DNA from the colonists. No bones or graves from that time period have ever been discovered. If the colonists were buried on Roanoke or Croatoan, the graves may have been lost to the shifting sands and tides. If they were buried by the Chowan River, they haven't yet found their burial site. And we know so little about the other lost colonists, we can't find any of their relatives left behind in England. DNA is an amazing tool in solving mysteries and crimes, but the chances of finding this kind of evidence get smaller with every passing year. Answers about the Roanoke settlers will probably remain a mystery unless we find the burial sites or other objects that could only belong to them. Where would you look for evidence of the lost colony's fate? The way I kind of do it and the way I kind of teach it is I found a great document-based question about the Roanoke mystery from a website called Teaching of Magic. I think they moved to Croatoan. That's my guess. That's my belief, but I don't know. But, yeah. Oh, looks like number 3 is Witch Hunt. I think I'll make a series out of this, because obviously Salem witches are pretty crazy too. Ingrot or Putnams versus Pullmans, the family beef. But I think I'm going to leave it at that. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Bye.